Hello there and welcome everyone to this new season of the Ultimate Supply Chain podcast. I'm Louise Barber, Global Head of Marketing at DHL Supply Chain, and I'll be your host for this series. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Radu Palamariu, who's been working in consulting and executive search roles for the last 20 years, with a focus on helping businesses building out strong teams to achieve better results. Radu has a really strong passion for logistics and supply chains, and he's the co-author of a new book, Amazon best-selling From Source to Sold, Stories of Leadership in Supply Chain. He's currently Managing Director, Asia Pacific and Europe of Alcott Global. Radu, welcome to the podcast and thanks so much for being our guest on this second season.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, before we jump into our discussion today, I'm curious to know, how did you end up in supply chain after studying psychology? I mean, to be fair, my team's always shocked and surprised when I tell them I started life as an accountant, but your jump seems way more significant.
Yeah, and there's more irony somehow to this because my day job is headhunting, and a lot of people still have the perception that careers are somehow linear. So I certainly do not exhibit that in my own.
Sure.
So I graduated psychology, then I did about 3 years in training, development, executive coaching. In the middle of that, I got married and traveled the world for about 6 months sabbatical. Then I went on to start my own business, failed miserably, went bust. Then I got a job, stayed in there for about 8 months. Then I got another job, stayed in there for 10 months. And then, so I displayed typical Generation Y type of moving around. And then I stumbled across executive search. I hadn't done search before. I got hired by a company that was setting up at that time in Asia, their Singapore office. I wasn't focused on supply chain, but the Singapore market is extremely competitive with 3,000 other recruitment companies and about 30,000 or 40,000 people working in the field. For a population of 5 million is probably the highest concentration of recruiters per capita. And I realized that you can't be a generalist. And my first big client was a logistics company. Basically, that's how it all started for me. I started with that company. I went deeper and deeper from logistics. I ended up working with manufacturing companies. And here I am 10 years later. I can say that I know a thing or two about supply chain and logistics, hopefully, and then that's how I specialized within supply chain and logistics. We wrote a book, we did the events, we do Oscars, we do a lot of other things on top of executive search. But I hardly can say that this was anywhere planned.
Obviously, the best plans are always the ones that are not planned. So, I think a lot of us have stumbled our way towards the careers we've ended up with. And obviously you and I are no different in that. Recruitment, headhunting, that is a great way to find great leaders, which is obviously a good source for a book. Source to Sold, your collection of leadership stories from various leaders in our industry. In that, you talk a lot about the profile of supply chain leaders and what makes them tick. The bits that stood out for me, or a couple of bits that stood out to me, you talk about them being pragmatic and can-do types. And you've asked a fundamental question. Why don't we see more of those pragmatic can-do types becoming CEOs? Why was that a pivotal question for you to answer?
Yeah, and maybe a bit of the origin story of the book. So Knut, who's the partner at McKinsey, and myself, about 2 years ago, so this was at the height of COVID, we were talking and saying, look, wouldn't it be cool if we saw more supply chain leaders, logistics leaders take on a CEO role? And we were brainstorming, is there something that we could potentially do to help the community, or inspire at least, if maybe not directly help? And this book was our attempt to do that. It's been a year since the book was released. So on the 4th of October 2023, it's going to be exactly a year. It's been about 20,000 people that have bought the book. It has reached far and wide, from Iraq to Afghanistan, I think, to India, Mexico, to Guatemala, to corners of the earth we never thought it would reach, really, to the point where I was in San Francisco. I tell you a fun story. Early this year, I wrote to Roshan, who's the chief supply chain officer, or handles most of the supply chain of Tesla. I was connected to him for a while, never met him. I wrote to him, I said, hey, look, obviously I'm curious about Tesla. I'd love to catch up over a coffee. And I never expected him to write back, in fairness. I mean, he's a fairly busy guy. He did write back, and he sent a picture of the book saying, well, figure that, I'm actually just reading your book. I'd love to catch up, come to our factory. I went for a Fremont factory visit. This is the first Tesla factory in California. And that's because of the book.
Amazing.
So, long answer to your question. I'll come back to the how do we see more. But the prelude is that I think we've been mind blown, both Knut and I, of the relevance, or that's what we think at least, that this book has had. I mean, we were hoping it's going to have, but now after 1 year, we are convinced it has had for the community. And how do we get more supply chain and logistics professionals to be CEOs? So first, read the book, obviously. It's a great book. Secondly, I'll use a metaphor. I'll use a story. It's not even a metaphor. It's a historic story. In about 50, 60 years ago, there was a runner, or there were many runners, but there was the 1 mile run. And nobody was able to run under 4 minutes. So the mile was not possible. Scientists, God bless their soul, had proven scientifically that the human body can run the mile under 4 minutes. And then a beautiful thing happened. A gentleman called Roger Bannister, I think, he's been made sir in the meantime.
He's a Brit. We love him.
He's a Brit, obviously. The greatest athletes are Brits. And he broke that 4-minute mile record. And that was fantastic in its own accord. But what happened subsequently was even more mind-blowing. Within weeks, somebody else broke that. And within weeks, somebody else. And now that 4 minutes mile run is basically something that a high school athlete does, right? So they do it under the 4 minutes. What changed? What changed is the fact that people started to believe it's possible. So for us, the book is meant to, first and foremost, the how is important, but the how comes after the belief that you can do it. And that's, I think, that's a missing piece still within the community of chief supply chain officers, chief operations officers, head of logistics, the belief that, I can be CEO. What I do helps the function, helps the business. The function that I lead helps the business so much that I should be the CEO of the company, or I have the ability to be the CEO of the company. So that belief is first and foremost, that needs to be addressed in order to see more CEOs coming from the supply chain field, from the operations field, from the logistics field. The how, maybe I stop for a second so you can ask some more follow-ups. But the how, of course, we can talk more, and there's a couple of tips and tricks there as well.
Look, the pragmatic and can-do thing is definitely something I recognise in the leaders in our own business here. If I think of our board, they are all really pragmatic can-do types. And I have to say, most of them are really visionary too, that I see that belief. Are you seeing a change in that around the perception of supply chain, maybe post-pandemic, where everyone's talking about supply chains? I mean, pre-pandemic, people barely knew what a supply chain was. And now, I mean, I've said this before, but my mum talks about supply chains. So have you seen a change there? Have you seen maybe a bit more swagger from the supply chain leaders?
100%. The COVID pandemic was a blessing in disguise for supply chain folks. The prominence, the spotlight of the function overall just blew out of proportion. You could read it in the paper, and read it in Economist, in Times Magazine. You see Santa Claus carrying a ship, all sorts of things that all of a sudden put supply chain on everybody's awareness, right? Everybody, meaning your parents, my parents, and so on. Now, whether or not they actually understand it's a different story, but at least they kind of got the concept that it exists. There's something like supply chain and logistics, that it exists. Now, what has happened since the beginning of the year to now is the post-pandemic world, where a lot of businesses went back to cost as a main measure of success, and I'm overgeneralizing, but if last 2 years it was resilience, it was how do you mitigate your risks, is how do you even make and get your product delivered. Supply chain was the most painful element to fix of the company. Now there's a lot less disruption. I mean, we're not dealing with the same. So it has gotten prominence. You can argue supply chain leaders got a seat at the table, got a seat at the board, which was great. And now now in September, 9 months or so, businesses kind of went, by and large, not all of them, but by and large, to good old, okay, but can you get this cheaper? Can you cut costs here? Can you do, inflation and so on? So now it's a matter of the supply chain leaders and operations and logistics leaders keeping their seats at the table, maintaining relevance in a world that, again, has shifted. Yeah, so the objectives and the priorities of CEOs and boards have, again, shifted. So in order to do that well, and there's some that have done it fantastically well, there's others that haven't. It's a little bit like, using another example, a kid goes to his father, a 5-year-old goes to his father and asks the father, hey, can I have some ice cream? It's in the night, it's in the evening, 7 p.m., 8 p.m. The father says, hey man, look, no, you cannot, you're going to bed, please. After a couple of these attempts, the kid changes his pitch and says, hey father, I've had a long day at school, you've had a long day at work. Why don't we talk about it over a scoop of ice cream?
Yeah.
The father says, yeah, what a great idea. I'd love to do that. I'm oversimplifying. The point of that story is there's always priorities, right? So, of course, over COVID, it was actually called supply chain. It was actually at the core. Now, people care about CEOs and boards, care about cost, optimization, care about geopolitics is still there. Sustainability is obviously high on the agenda. So you got to change in order to get your scoop of ice cream. You got to, stay at
change
the
story.
You got to change. And it's not from a manipulative perspective. It's actually from a, practical. You got to use whatever is the priority of the board, link what you're doing in supply chain and logistics to help the priority of the board. And that's how you maintain relevance. And that's a skill set. That's something that a lot of people still don't know how to do well. And that is an art and a skill and a soft skill that is badly, badly needed.
So how do you learn that skill?
So that's something that we talk quite a lot in the book, and that's more or less. So we have 26 contributors in the book, and different forms. All of them allude to this, and kind of the cheat sheet and the how. And again, we may or may not have time to go through all of this, but the how do you get to CEO? How do you get to the board as a CEO or CSCO is summarized in the book in the chain model. So the chain model is every letter stands for something. C, collaboration. H, holistic. A, adaptable. I, influence. N, narrative. Chain model. So that is actually the how do you, as an executive within supply chain and logistics operation, make and build your career to be on the board or to even become the CEO. So now N is the narrative. So I'll just expand a little bit further on the narrative because that is incredibly important. So choosing the right narrative, just like the child, right? Can I have some ice cream that's all about him? Can we share an ice cream and talk about, how your day and my day went? It's all of a sudden changes the narrative, changes the meaning for the father, right? I mean, again, oversimplifying, but pretty much is the same in a business.
Completely.
You think about it. And how do you learn that? Well, first, awareness, yeah. So again, I mean, if you're not even aware of this, then that's a showstopper, right? Second, I mean, pay attention. What does and there's some really good leaders. We had this in a conference that we organized earlier in the year, and one of them said to me, he said, now to get my projects approved, I link it to sustainability. And again, I'm not manipulating, but I'm actually saying, look, this is how this is going to help my company where I know that sustainability is top 3 priority for my board and my CEO. This is how supply chain plays into that. Now, again, it's not just sustainability. Another aspect, and oversimplifying, but this should be a mantra in supply chain leaders. Talk business. Don't talk supply chain. I mean, nobody cares about optimizations at large, about filling up rates.
Could not agree more.
How are you? So, okay, sustainability is ultimately an objective, but it's not just sustainability. How are you helping business make more, get more clients, right? I mean, just spending more money on sustainability is not going to help anybody either, right? So you need to do both. It's a world where both need to happen. Be more sustainable and acquire market share, delight your customers, expand, and so on. So this language, pay attention and then use the right levers to get ultimately what you want. Trade win-wins, really. I mean, this is, again, not manipulation.
Ultimately, it's about understanding your customer, isn't it? And putting yourself in your customer's shoes, understanding what your customer's pinch points, pain points are, and where you can help them. It's finding your why. One of my biggest passions is finding that, understanding that, and telling that story, having that narrative in a really consistent and amplifiable way. And look, I completely agree with you. If you find that story and you are able to repeat it, but make it relevant where it needs to be relevant to individual customers, individual sectors, individual regions, whatever that happens to be, that's where the power really comes. Fascinating. So you mentioned that you spoke to 26 different leaders in your book, including our own Ken Allen, actually, who's the former CEO of DHL Express. Is there a secret sauce? Did you find a common denominator that links all of those supply chain leaders and perhaps differentiates those from leaders in other sectors?
It is the chain model, and we use this abbreviation obviously also for ease of remembering, because it is supply chain. So the chain model and the 5 attributes would be the common denominator of all of them. I would say also, pragmatically speaking, they are quite different people and they've had quite different careers. And that in itself serves as a reminder that there's many paths to Rome as well. There's many roads that lead to Rome. And that's why we kind of made it in this easy to read format. But ultimately what kind of the common thread is the chain model. And that's what all of them in one way, shape or form said that helped them get where they are. So again, at the core, if we oversimplify, right? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, as Einstein says. It's the core skills, is the soft skills. It's not hard skills. I think a lot of people confuse the fact that if you do a good job technically, that's what is going to get them ahead in their careers. It's hardly up to a point. Sure. I mean, if you're, if you're a CFO or a CSC, I mean, if you're a CFO, you'd better understand some basic finance, and obviously you need to understand accounting. Are you necessarily the best accountant or the best, financial control? Not really. I mean, you need to know how to manage, inspire teams and people. You need to know how to build relationships. You need to know how to influence stakeholders. That's all in the realm of soft skills, and it's not hard skills. So the sooner people realize and recognize this, and in order to be a leader, you have to realize that it is really your soft skills that will help you get there. Your soft skills, your network, and in the book it's very clear. It's the chain model, So the 5 different attributes of the chain model that push these leaders through, and then what is quite inspiring in its own accord is the fact that each of them had their own individuality. And I remember somebody that, one of the readers, she told me that she read the book, and I asked her, what's the main takeaway for you? And she felt liberated because she had come from a chemical engineering background,
right,
and landed in supply chain. Again, like most, me and most people in supply chain, we didn't plan for this. We did not when we were 5 and people asked, what do you want to grow up? You
supply chain.
Exactly. Who says that?
Supply chain.
So she was saying that for a long, and she didn't even necessarily realize, but for a long time she had this limiting belief, I did not have a formal education in supply chain. I didn't go and take a bachelor or master's or something. So that's why I can only grow that much within my organization. Having read the book, she realized, hey, I mean, all the 26, none of them had anything to do with supply chain.
Sure.
Supply chain overall as a word profession and all of that is barely 30, 40 years, right? So logistics is way older. Manufacturing is way older, but supply chain is fairly new. And yes, sure, we have now an explosion of MBAs in supply chain. We've, after COVID, there's a lot more curriculums and education available, but this is fairly recent. So for her, it was a liberating moment to realize, hey, actually, there's a lot of people, most people, all the people in the book that have made it and had nothing to do with supply chain. So can I?
Sure.
So again, you see the recurring theme. First is belief, right? And not everybody needs to be a CEO. Not everybody needs to be a board member. That's perfectly fine to be a functional expert and the best sourcing of semicon person in the world. No quarrels, with
we
that.
We need everyone, yeah.
Exactly. But if you do want, I think first is belief. Second, yes, you need to arm yourself with a chain model and make sure that you have the different aspects and you work on it, because as everything in life, you can develop skills. You can get better. Talking about narrative in particular, right? Not everybody is born to be nobody is actually born as a public speaker, but you can work on it. You can get better at it with practice. And the more you get better at it, the more you'll be better at telling stories, at creating narratives, at influencing and inspiring your teams and stakeholders, hence being a better leader. So that's something that you can always work on and learn.
It's a really good point, actually. That mix that you were talking about, having the narrative as well as the fundamental skills that you need to do your job. There's never going to be an alternative for that, is there? I wonder, Radu, we are seeing more and more people enter the industry who are qualified, formally qualified in supply chain. Could that be a barrier to them? Might that hold them back? That they're so qualified, perhaps they miss some of those softer skills?
I think by and large, no degree prepares you necessarily for soft skills you acquire through interaction, and you need to step into organization. That's why, work from home and work remotely, whilst, we made do with it during COVID, is not really an option long term, because you don't acquire soft skills over Zoom.
No, completely agree. I think about the people who were joining our business, and perhaps those who joined our business during COVID. I think about how I learned. I learned by copying the person next to me. I learned by seeing how they did things, interacting with them, going for a coffee, having lunch. All of those things are so important. I completely agree. I think longer term, those are the things we're going to miss. You can, there's a reason why we have Open University and you can do it from home.
Exactly. But, to your point, so I see a higher risk of businesses that don't know how to properly retain this young talent. So, you have super sharp people. They've even had an education in supply chain. Some haven't. And I don't see this as a barrier, right? And they join a company and then they end up put in the front of a laptop with a blue screen with a system from the 80s. Which can happen on 90s, and they're like, oh.
Yeah.
So I see that much more as a risk. I think businesses need to step up their game in inspiring and really utilizing fully this young talent, and also giving them that higher. But again, it comes to the narrative, right? Do you really believe that what you're doing, and for example, DHL, you have a strong sustainability push as well, zero carbon, reducing emissions. By the way, that should be our humanity push if we're to avoid further natural damage. That's a very significant purpose for a lot of young people, right? Are companies that good at communicating that? I'm not so sure. And then,
right.
We are underutilizing talent, I think, if you just get them to create Excels and reports and God knows, again, you're underutilizing talent. So I think that's an element that we should be a bit more mindful of, really taking this young talent and fully utilizing them, giving them tasks, letting them bite more than they can chew, because they might come up with something that's super smart. And
listening to them, they really do. I think about, again, when I started work as a youngster, you were always the most junior, and that's kind of natural, is based on experience. But you didn't really have a place at the table. I think one of the things that differentiates DHL, and this isn't about DHL, but we do try to give every level of the organisation a place at the table. We know that people entering our organisation have an opinion, that they're the future. We have to be building for that future. And the way to do that is to understand what makes them tick. As you say, Radu, one of the things that is absolutely critical to them is the sustainability agenda, in its broadest sense, not just the green part of it. And if we don't smash that target, if we don't not just fulfill our responsibility, it's have a commitment that we deliver to. If we don't do that, then, we're not going to attract that new talent, or keep that new talent.
And look, we talked a lot about narrative. So let me just also give the flip side, because there are some that only talk.
Yeah,
so
that's almost worse, isn't it?
There's a flip side that, you're a very good talker, get zero done, right? So there's obviously that doesn't fly either. Yeah. So at some point it catches up with you. So that's why chain model, right? So C stands for collaboration, and collaboration we give a lot of examples in the book. I won't spend time, but it's really beyond the buzzword, because everybody say collaborate. Yeah, but are you actually doing it? Right. So that's a different ball game. Collaboration cross departments. H is holistic. So you got to understand the business fully. I dare say, all organizations, I haven't seen any in my 20 years working in consulting related jobs that do a good job at large, at the company level, right? Getting the employees in a holistic perspective. And that's fine. Different departments have different KPIs. The KPI focuses you ultimately on something, so you kind of miss the bigger picture. So if your KPI in procurement is cost, you might get the cheapest rate for something, but maybe then the logistics person will have to pay more for air freight, creating it, right? And then, you have not actually achieved anything because you've not looked at it holistically.
Yeah.
So that's I would say a big. So usually the senior management is something that they can help think holistically and push this. And companies that are better, they do rotation, right? So then the more people you have exposed in various departments, then the better you can understand the different facets of the business, right? So that's important. Adaptability. Now, again, it's a big word, it's a buzzword, but it means, are you able to really switch gears? So if the situation changes, don't get hung up on your preconceived ideas, plans, or whatsoever. You might just need to, adapt. So like change. And influence is a lot more personal than the narrative is, like, one-on-one. How do you influence? So if you're in supply chain and you're talking to finance, is one language, one objective that finance has versus sales. They have slightly different objectives. You got to be able to mold yourself and to create these conversations that are win-win with different stakeholders, bearing in mind what's their objectives, what's your objectives, and then finding that win-win. And a lot of times it's conflicting, so you need to be able to kind of navigate that. It's a let's say it can be a healthy tension. In a lot of companies, it's a completely toxic tension. And all of this put together with the narrative make a good leader. It's not just one aspect in its own. So that's why it's not necessarily easy. I wouldn't say it's easy at all. And it's also, being a leader is a responsibility. It's not some sort of a badge of honor that you get to command people. I think some people still think that's, or unfortunately they have that understanding. It's not easy, and it is a big responsibility that comes with quite a lot of different skill sets that a lot of people need to work on.
Yeah, I completely get that. And when I reflect on some of the best leaders that I've had the privilege of working with, it's the ones who can talk to anyone. It's the ones that know their stuff for sure. But when you perhaps go into a warehouse, they can have a conversation with anyone at any level. And the ones that can do that with absolute authenticity, they're not listening for the sake of listening, they're engaging, there's eye contact, they're adding to the conversation, they've got something to add, they're probably interacting with what's going on, even though this was probably a role, if they did it, they performed, many years ago. That's when you really see a light in the eyes of the people that they're asking to follow them. And I think having that mix of, really great people skills plus really great operational skills is perhaps what makes a great supply chain leader. Is that different in anything else? Is that unique to supply chain?
No, I don't think so. I think that's
It's leadership, isn't it?
It's fairly. I mean, that makes a good leader overall.
Yeah,
Just that
completely
I
agree.
don't like to talk about stuff. I mean, I don't know the finance world, or I know less, right? Or I don't know the IT world as much. So I like to talk about what I know. I don't think, however, it's that. I don't think it's that different. And also, like in the executive search, so we play C-level roles. Yeah, we work on CEO jobs or on CEO jobs, and companies come to us to find them the next leaders and the next talent and the next executives to lead them to better performance and teams and so on. I think overall a mistake the companies do make, a lot actually, even to this day, is they focus too much on strategy and IQ. And that's important. Obviously, you don't want a CEO or COO or CSO that doesn't have, they're not smart and they don't have good strategy. But don't underestimate the importance of EQ, because ultimately an organization will not long-term follow a leader that has poor EQ, that doesn't have people skills. After a while, again,
you've got to bring it to life, haven't you? You have to be able to bring it to life.
I haven't seen any C-level that is not good at communication skills. It's almost like this is a basic fundamental hygiene factor. So they can talk the way through interviews. It's very basic, always do ref checks, always do the ref checks from their bosses and ex-bosses, but also their teams, then their peers. That will give you a good sense. And always, I mean, okay, I can't say per se that this works for everything, but long-term, the best leaders, absolutely, I'm convinced that they need to have the people skills, because people will not follow, organizations will not follow leaders that they eventually perceive to be not authentic, just, walking the big game, but not walking the talk.
The talk,
It just not apply. And it's such a fundamental human thing. And still, there's quite a few organizations that hire super sharp, super smart people as their leaders, but they're missing the hard part, which, I wouldn't underestimate.
So, Radu, we've talked a little bit about the fact that we are in quite a strange time at the moment. Post-pandemic, we're seeing all sorts of economic volatility. What do organisations need to do to attract and retain talent right now?
So now it's shifted from a candidate market, which was the last couple of years, to basically an employer market. So let me talk about the retaining part, because literally today, talking to an executive, he was saying, when we started to see signs of a slowdown late last year, my board told me, don't worry, we've had some good years, focus on retaining your staff, and, we will not take significant measures, cost cutting and so on. Quarter later, they went and shifted completely their pitch and said, well, you need to cut costs, cut it deep. and this is going to be quite a bit of a economic challenge for us this year and perhaps in 2024. But the reality is that most businesses, and it is unfortunate, but they have a very short memory on one side, and they also have this knee-jerk, quarter by quarter. I guess it's also the curse of the stock market focus, which is really limiting. So I would say that the smarter, better, longer-term, sustainable businesses don't think like this, and that reflects into the retentions side, right? Because if you change your pitch like that as an executive board, oh my God, okay, go cost-cutting. Firstly, that affects morale immediately. Like, I mean, I'm not say that you're in Lululand and, this is smashing economic times and so on. I mean, I'm not saying be disconnected from reality, but how you pass that message to your staff, it obviously makes a huge difference. You can be inspiring even in a downturn and say, look, we need to take some measures, of course. We need to cut some cost. Hopefully you don't need to fire people. If you do have to fire people, even that can be done with decency and honor and, whilst keeping the current staff motivated, rather than you just do it over Zoom or God knows. I mean, we've seen something, right? But I would say the focus as a leader in these times and as we speak is, well, first, is my top talent feeling safe, feeling engaged, and are they on board with the fact that, yes, we are going through tough times, Tough times will always come because it's ups and downs in life and in business. But now is the time for us to fight, to get market share, to be prepared. Another executive was telling me, we've been racing cars, business being the car, we've been racing our businesses in our cars at 200 kilometers per hour. Now it's going at 50 kilometers per hour. It's best that we change the tires, we do any upgrades, we change systems. Now is the time, right? We have time. Yeah. So there's a lot of positive ways in which you can spin a challenge and you can spin a difficult situation, which I think most businesses, let's just be real, are in today. I mean, a lot of companies are sitting on a lot of inventory because it was excess inventory ordered during COVID. You're not going to get peak season this year much, right? It is what it is. You can't change that. So all that you can do as a leader, you got to make sure that your stuff is aligned, that you're well prepared and thinking long-term, not just thinking, okay, what do I do this 3 months to make my numbers look cosmetically good? Always short-term, think long-term, and make sure that your key staff is engaged and is with you on that journey. Now, of course, you might have to take some hard decisions. Some people might have to let go. Not everybody is equally performing. Look, it is the nature of life. If you're going to win the Champions League in football, you got to have the best team. No team in this world works with the same players all the time. You got to make some changes. It is normal. But I would say make sure that the top talent is well aligned, in tune, and in line with your vision and with your ambitions and with your long term, because otherwise they're going to leave. Business will turn, market will come back up, and that's when you're going to be in a world of pain if you no longer have the right people on the boat to help you navigate the good times.
Makes perfect sense. Love your analogy with the Champions League there. Radu, I'm a diehard Liverpool fan, and whether we're in the Champions League or not, the leadership displayed by Mr. Klopp, by Jurgen Klopp, you only have to see the fans. They're going to follow him through the bad times and the good. For all of the reasons you've talked about, it's because he knows what he's doing. He does it with authenticity. He's got a narrative that he's speaking to, and he's continuously inspiring. That's an analogy we perhaps could have started with. It's, I think one of the things I've learned through talking to you, I started this conversation thinking perhaps we would learn something specific about supply chains, but what we're learning about is how to be a good leader, no matter what industry you're in. And those are the things that run true. I think part of it is about being a good human being. So Radu, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure having this conversation with you. Like I say, lots of insights to take away, and thank you for sharing your book and what you've learned from your book and the conversations you have with those 26 high hitters. Thank you to all our listeners, whether you're joining us on the website, on Spotify or on YouTube. Firstly, make sure you look out for Radu's book. It's available on Amazon. Keep an eye on social media and podcast channels for the next episodes of the Ultimate Supply Chain podcast. Thank you again for joining us, and look forward to speaking to you soon.